And welcome back. Civility in politics. Some would say that is a rarity these days, especially on the national stage. Tonight, former Indiana Senator Richard Lugar and former Indiana Congressman Lee Hamilton held a forum at the University of Southern Indiana. Before they took the stage, I had the chance to talk to them face to face about the state of how our government works, how we pick our leaders, the impact of social media, and how things have indeed changed. Robert Kennedy once said, politics is an honorable adventure. In this day and age, how do you respond to that? Is it still? That quote was about 50 years ago. Senator Lugar?
Well, it is still an honorable pursuit. The question, obviously, is how different people decide to pursue it. And for some, it's a question of survival in office. Or it's a question of my way or the highway, trying to establish a particular point of view and deciding that that is it. It's not a question really of governance or the civility of dealing with other parties, but simply to be a stalwart.
I think what troubles me the most is the gap between the level of discussion by the presidential nominees and the reality of the problems. It's just breathtaking. The new president is going to face some enormously difficult problems across the board, domestically and foreign as well. And yet, when you listen to the debates, it's hugely disappointing because they're ignoring the problems for the most part, and the ones that they're speaking about, they speak with unreal solutions, not impressive substantively. And so I keep sitting there asking myself, are these people actually going to become president of the United States?
Essentially, there is not really a very good discussion of how the United States is going to deal with the Middle East, for example, how we're going to deal with foreign policy generally, quite apart from basic domestic problems that we have. What seems to be occurring is a perception that a large group of Americans feel badly hurt, badly injured by life, whatever it may be.
They're angry.
They're angry,
yeah.
And therefore the candidates picking that up are really saying, I can sock it to them harder than anybody else. And that whole group of politicians, starting with the president, the Congress, whoever may be, even your city council member, these are the folks really that have made the problem, and they've got to get rid of a whole lot. And so as a result, it's more of a theater, a theatrical performance.
Social media has really come about since Dick and I left politics. Yeah. But I think it's having a profound impact. People communicate instantaneously. They organize. It's weakened the political parties. It's weakened the political structures. It's weakened government in many ways. Has a lot of pluses, but it's a new way of communicating that is beginning to impact our politics significantly. I've gone into the great monuments in Washington, and you see Jefferson, and you see Lincoln, and you see Teddy Roosevelt, and all the rest of them, and you have these magnificent inscriptions quoting from their speeches. But then it strikes you, they stand mute. They're not there anymore to solve these problems. We have to solve them. We created the problems, we got to solve them.
What advice would you give President Barack Obama? What advice would you give to lawmakers right now in dealing with a very dangerous world that we live in now, a different world than your generation grew up in, which was also dangerous, but it's a different type of danger we face today, sometimes an invisible danger. What advice would you give the president?
You're speaking specifically about the threat of terrorism. I do not think it threatens the republic. We're going to survive. We're going to prevail. But having said that, it's a very serious threat. And so I would say to President Obama, we've got to up our game. We have to up our game defensively. That's largely a law enforcement effort, protecting the homeland in all sorts of ways. But we also have to up our game offensively so that we go after these safe havens that they've developed.
Well, essentially, the president would respond to your question by saying about 20% of Syria that was covered by ISIL is now taken back, 40% of Iraq that was covered. But that, of course, begs the question about how do we take back the rest of it? How do we, in fact, bring about perhaps a new set of divisions in Syria or in Iraq or with the Kurds as they cover 4 nations? In other words, a very complex formula that's going to require a great deal of international negotiation to bring some stability so that there are governments. There are people who can govern themselves at that point, as opposed simply to people who are hit by the ISIL people or by the others coming backward and forward. So it's a tremendously complex problem, but it's one that the president really has to address. I think he's attempting to do so.
But if you're really going to solve these problems, you're going to have to improve governance in the region so that you don't have these people that are so disaffected, so marginalized, so angry. And so a political solution has to be sought. And we haven't made much progress there. My interest today is not whether a person is a Democrat or a Republican or a liberal or a conservative. My interest is, are they prepared to work seriously to solve the problem? The thing about working with Dick Lugar is that he and I wanted to solve the problem. And we did have our differences, and we represented parties with different points of view. But we also knew that in order to make the country work, we had to solve the problem.
I sincerely appreciate the time I was given with former Indiana Senator Richard Lugar and former Indiana Congressman Lee Hamilton. Both men, by the way, are recipients of the Presidential Medal of Freedom.